Ero felice di essere qui a iniziare questo convegno che è stata un'impresa congiunta del direttivo dell'AIS e della consulta della ricerca. Ripensare la società nell'emergenza e nelle trasformazioni globali con Weber 100 anni dopo è la sfida che ci siamo proposti. E il primo obiettivo del convegno è stato quello di coinvolgere l'intera comunità della sociologia italiana nello sforzo di riutilizzazione dell'opera weberiana nel nostro quotidiano lavoro di ricerca, coinvolgendo diverse generazioni che nel tempo si sono succedute nella rivisitazione di quello che Müller chiamerà con noi il classico dei classici della disciplina, e che possono essere continuate da quelle generazioni che oggi si stanno formando. È il Weber studioso del mutamento in chiave storico comparata che illustra le straordinarie potenzialità sul piano della comprensione delle strutture e delle culture e la fecondità euristica per la concettualizzazione dei fenomeni sociali, e il Weber studioso degli elementi di tragicità e ambiguità insiti nei processi di trasformazione, possono risultare entrambi più che mai attuali e preziosi. L'obiettivo ulteriore che ci siamo posti è quello di ristabilire l'autonomia della scienza sociologica per un verso e per l'altro insieme la sua vocazione interdisciplinare, sia nell'ambito teorico che in quello metodologico. Tutte le scienze sociali si nutrono di interdipendenze, ma l'interdisciplinarità è infruttuosa se non poggia sull'autonoma configurazione delle singole scienze, continuamente chiamate a separare e a distinguere prospettive e metodi di studio, cioè a specializzarsi e a fare tutto questo in un continuo dialogo con le altre scienze, in particolare, ma non solo, con quelle sociali. Il processo di razionalizzazione, che l'ultima rilettura di Weber mette al centro della sua opera, è da questo punto di vista interessante sia per il modo in cui Weber vi ha visto un significato culturale universale, ma anche perché nel modo in cui l'ha studiato nella sua concretezza storica, come una catena di conseguenze legate a opzioni culturali ogni volta specifiche, è stato da Weber visto superando in qualche modo i limiti e le condizioni che lo legavano al modo in cui questo veniva definito nel suo tempo e dalle discipline, in particolare il diritto, l'economia, all'interno del quale era compreso fino a quel momento. L'impresa di Weber di costruire la sua sociologia, fondando per noi la disciplina sociologica, è stato quello di trascendere quelle condizioni e di individuare delle categorie che proprio per questo oggi sono per noi ancora significative. Abbiamo provato a identificare alcune costellazioni di categorie weberiane: capitalismo e spirito del capitalismo, economia, potenza, potere, Führer, democrazia, diritto, razionalizzazione, disincantamento e reincantamento del mondo. Abbiamo provato a ritornare al metodo weberiano fuori dagli schemi. L'intenzione è stata quella di scomporre e ricomporre le relazioni tra le categorie weberiane, tenendo presente la sfida di ridefinire appunto l'autonomia teorico-metodologica della conoscenza sociologica rispetto alle altre scienze sociali con cui siamo continuamente chiamati a dialogare in una prospettiva interdisciplinare. e il contributo sociologico sarà tanto più riconoscibile e fruttuoso quanto più chiara sarà quell'autonomia concettuale e metodologica. La novità di questo convegno non è soltanto negli intenti culturali, ma anche nella formula. Abbiamo cercato di valorizzare al massimo la necessità di dover essere sulla piattaforma digitale, sfruttando i tempi delle sessioni per la discussione, dei contributi video che i panelist hanno inviato e che sono già tutti sulla piattaforma e sul sito AIS. Abbiamo sollecitato tutta la comunità sociologica come non era mai successo prima, e sono per questo molto felice di dire che vi è stata una risposta anche dalle riviste di sociologia italiane, che hanno messo per la prima volta in open access una serie di articoli che fanno riferimento alla ricezione di Weber nella sociologia italiana negli ultimi decenni. Faccio riferimento ad articoli che trovate tutti linkati, ancora questi, sul sito dell'AIS. Ed è in questa sfida che insieme ci ritroviamo, con una prima sessione di apertura che con Müller aprirà anche con un richiamo al continuo dialogo tra la sociologia italiana e le altre sociologie, in particolare quelle europee, all'interno di una tradizione che in Weber si riconosce e che da Weber in qualche modo vuole riconoscersi come tradizione europea, di un'Europa che non si ritiene più essere il centro del mondo, di un'Europa che fa parte di una globalizzazione non più centralizzata, ma di un'Europa che vuole per questo diventare ancora capace di costruire una sociologia che trovi nelle diversità culturali, ma nella universalità dei problemi e dei temi a cui queste risposte culturali fanno riferimento, il senso della sua ricerca e del suo contributo, non soltanto alla conoscenza sociologica, non soltanto al discorso accademico, ma anche nel suo essere in pieno sociologia pubblica. E a questo aspetto della nostra impresa culturale, alle aspettative che nei confronti della sociologia in questo momento storico specifico si addensano nella sfera pubblica, fa riferimento anche l'intervento, il saluto che ha voluto mandarci il ministro dell'Università e della Ricerca, professore Gaetano Manfredi, con un saluto che non è istituzionale, ma che appunto fa riferimento alle aspettative che la cultura italiana, ma anche la ricerca e l'università e la società italiane hanno nei confronti della nostra disciplina. Possiamo inviare quindi il videomassaggio del ministro Manfredi.
Ci troviamo davanti a una grande sfida, la costruzione della società
Non c'è l'audio.
post-Covid. Sarà una società in cui il ruolo delle tecnologie sarà ancora più importante, ma sarà anche una società
Per
che
piacere,
dovrà essere
chiedo alla
più
regia
inclusiva,
di
più equa, più
rimandare
giusta
il
e che
messaggio
consenta
con
lo
l'audio.
sviluppo delle diverse. Ci troviamo davanti a una grande sfida, la costruzione della società post-Covid. Sarà una società in cui il ruolo delle tecnologie sarà ancora più importante, ma sarà anche una società che dovrà essere più inclusiva, più equa, più giusta e che consenta lo sviluppo delle diverse individualità in un contesto sociale coeso. Per questo motivo tutte le ricerche che noi dobbiamo mettere in
Per favore,
campo,
chiedo ai
tutta l'innovazione che noi
servizi
dobbiamo mettere in
multimediali di
campo non
inviare
può
l'audio
prescindere
perché
da una
non lo
valutazione
sentiamo.
dell'impatto sociale che queste ricerche possono avere. Le nuove scoperte, le nuove tecnologie impattano profondamente sull'organizzazione della società e quindi noi dobbiamo essere in grado di poter fare delle valutazioni corrette, di poter dare ai
Devono tornare
decisori politici
indietro.
delle
Sì, per
indicazioni che
piacere o
siano
torniamo
giuste. Per
indietro
questo motivo
oppure
io
lo mandiamo in
ritengo
un
che il
altro
ruolo delle
momento
scienze
perché
sociali nei
evidentemente
prossimi anni
non
sarà un
sta
ruolo
funzionando.
centrale e che sempre dovrà più contaminare quelle che sono le attività delle scienze tecnologiche, delle scienze. Ci troviamo davanti a una grande sfida, la costruzione della società post-Covid. Sarà una società in cui il ruolo delle tecnologie sarà ancora più importante, ma sarà anche una società che dovrà essere più inclusiva, più equa, più giusta e che consenta lo sviluppo delle diverse individualità in un contesto sociale coeso. Per questo motivo tutte le ricerche che noi dobbiamo mettere in campo, tutta l'innovazione che noi dobbiamo mettere in campo non può
Io
prescindere
continuo a non
da una
sentire.
valutazione dell'impatto
No, non si
sociale che
sente.
queste ricerche possono avere. Le nuove scoperte, le nuove
Va bene,
tecnologie
io direi
impattano
che i
profondamente
servizi
sull'organizzazione della
multimediali ci
società e
hanno,
quindi noi dobbiamo essere in grado di poter fare delle valutazioni
ci
corrette,
hanno
di
messo in un
poter
momento di
dare ai decisori
difficoltà.
politici delle
Scusatemi.
indicazioni che siano giuste. Per questo motivo io ritengo che il ruolo delle scienze sociali nei prossimi anni sarà un ruolo. Ci troviamo davanti a una grande sfida,
Ecco,
la costruzione della società post-Covid. Sarà una società in cui il ruolo delle tecnologie sarà ancora più importante,
Sentiamo.
ma sarà anche una società che dovrà essere più inclusiva, più equa, più giusta e che consenta lo sviluppo delle diverse individualità in un contesto sociale coeso. Per questo motivo tutte le ricerche che noi dobbiamo mettere in campo, tutta l'innovazione che noi dobbiamo mettere in campo non può prescindere da una valutazione dell'impatto sociale che queste ricerche possono avere. Le nuove scoperte, le nuove tecnologie impattano profondamente sull'organizzazione della società e quindi noi dobbiamo essere in grado di poter fare delle valutazioni corrette, di poter dare ai decisori politici delle indicazioni che siano giuste. Per questo motivo io ritengo che il ruolo delle scienze sociali nei prossimi anni sarà un ruolo centrale e che sempre dovrà più contaminare quelle che sono le attività delle scienze tecnologiche, delle scienze esatte. Un grande sforzo collettivo che sicuramente vedrà la comunità dei sociologi italiani al centro con una grande responsabilità e un grande impegno, che sarà sostenuto in tutte le iniziative che vedranno il Ministero protagonista e in tutti i programmi di ricerca del futuro.
Bene, e allora con tutte le difficoltà della diretta possiamo adesso dare la parola al presidente onorario dell'Associazione Italiana di Sociologia. Sono davvero felice di presentare, per piacere i microfoni tutti spenti, di presentare e dare la parola al professor Enzo Campelli. Prego.
Eccomi. Ci sente?
Sì, ti sentiamo bene.
Sono io che devo ringraziare, ovviamente. Sono io che devo ringraziare per aver pensato a me in una situazione così importante come questo convegno. Un convegno che torna a Weber e lo fa, come dire, perché sono 1000 forse le ragioni che portano oggi a tornare a Weber, il suo pensiero, il suo metodo, le sue categorie interpretative, perfino in qualche modo marginalmente la sua biografia. Tornare a Weber dopo le straordinarie vicende di questo secolo breve ma spaventosamente intenso. dopo la Shoah, dopo le 1000 guerre per patrie grandi e piccole, dentro, non dopo, dentro un processo di erosione delle comunità tradizionali che sembra inarrestabile. La comunità è uno dei grandi miti, non solo della nostra epoca, ma della nostra cultura, direi. Un mito tanto fantasticato, quanto desiderato, quanto oggetto di nostalgia. E dopo un processo di disincanto che è arrivato quasi forse alla perdita di senso, quasi alla disperazione o all'annichilimento. E dentro, come siamo, a una modernità...
Sì, mi sono collegata, ci sono riuscita, sì.
Una modernità contraddetta, autocontraddetta, una modernità, se mi permettete l'espressione, sola, senza compagni di strada, senza mentori e con pochi maestri. La nostra, tra le altre cose, è un'epoca di grande abbondanza di professori, ma di grande scarsità di maestri. Ecco, il titolo del convegno, e cioè ripensare la società nelle emergenze, nelle trasformazioni globali, quindi è tutt'altro che semplicemente il titolo di un convegno. È un manifesto, segnala un impegno, una necessità e forse addirittura una condizione di sopravvivenza per un futuro che si dibatte appunto tra emergenze e trasformazioni globali. È la necessità di un progetto, il richiamo alla necessità di un progetto. Ed in particolare direi è un impegno per la nostra disciplina, che è nata come disciplina precisamente sulla base di un progetto perfino utopico in certi momenti e per certi autori, di ripensamento e di riorganizzazione della vita in società. E per la nostra disciplina è davvero, io credo, un impegno cruciale, perché, almeno così a me sembra, la sociologia soffre da tempo di un deficit di teoria, un grave deficit di teoria, inteso quindi come una scarsa tendenza a farsi carico della responsabilità e delle finalità per cui è nata e di confrontarsi con i grandi temi. È scarsa in questo momento la capacità o la propensione di articolare modelli teorici che possano esserci utili. Come diceva un grande statistico, tutti i modelli sono falsi, però qualche volta sono utili. Ecco, il lavoro del sociologo, per come io lo vedo, non è quello di raccontare storie, di collezionare narrazioni, ma quello di un continuo appassionato, direbbe proprio Weber, un tentativo continuo condotto con passione e rigore di costruire strumenti teorici fondati, controllabili e utili all'interpretazione della vita sociale, utili perfino alla gestione della vita sociale, senza, badando bene, a evitare ogni confusione di ruoli. E su questo Weber ha scritto pagine importanti. Sembra a me che anche nella pandemia che sta scuotendo il mondo, sapere sociologico, a parte qualche sporadico caso, qualche caso isolato, non abbia avuto molta voce. E credo che sarà bene non riprendere il solito mantra vittimistico, non ci ascoltano. No, non è che non abbiamo avuto voce per qualcuno, ce l'ha negata o perché ce l'ha tolta, ma semplicemente perché abbiamo avuto poco da dire. Ora, è senz'altro vero che la scienza in periodo di Covid ha molti problemi, ma ho l'impressione che come disciplina collettivamente non siamo stati all'altezza della discussione, della situazione. Ora, è ben vero che è molto difficile che un convegno dia risposte a problemi di questa portata, ma basterebbe che riuscisse a individuare domande adeguate, proporzionate alle emergenze e alle trasformazioni che stiamo vivendo. È la qualità delle domande e non la precarietà sempre mutevole delle risposte che fa crescere la conoscenza. Mi fermo qui, augurando un buon lavoro a tutti e un buon lavoro a tutti noi.
Grazie a Enzo Campelli che ci richiama all'impegno che abbiamo davanti. E io vorrei dare la parola per un momento ad Antonello Costabile per sottolineare come questo convegno sia stato davvero il risultato di un impegno collettivo e corale cui hanno partecipato attraverso la consulta della ricerca tutte le sezioni dell'AIS. Prego, Antonello.
Buongiorno, grazie per la possibilità di rappresentare anche attraverso me le sezioni dell'AIS che tutte insieme hanno partecipato al lavoro collettivo di organizzazione, ma già di pensare insieme questo convegno. Addirittura con la professoressa Godi e con altri colleghi nella prima fase del lockdown e poi immediatamente dopo, quando abbiamo cominciato a discutere di questo convegno, proprio per sottolineare la volontà di mettere insieme generazioni diverse di studiosi, ma anche studiosi attenti del pensiero weberiano e della teoria weberiana, con giovani che utilizzano, chiamati a utilizzare, a fare i conti con la realtà contemporanea, utilizzando gli strumenti teorici e metodologici che Weber ci ha offerto. Non a caso avevamo pensato, se avessimo potuto svolgere questo convegno in presenza alla città di Bergamo, avevamo pensato proprio a un simbolo della fatica, della sofferenza di questo nostro tempo, delle sue crisi, che negli ultimi solo 10 anni, dalla crisi economica del 2008, che abbiamo detto essere la più grave crisi economica del dopoguerra, fino all'attuale crisi e la riemersione degli aspetti tragici della vita sociale, come appunto una occasione di riscoprire con Weber il ruolo pubblico della sociologia e non solo i punti forti del suo pensiero e la sua attualità. Quindi io solo una cosa voglio dire, perché quanto detto dalla professoressa Gode e dal professor Campelli è già ampiamente dà conto di questo nostro impegno che abbiamo avviato e speriamo in questi giorni di realizzare. Una sola cosa che vorrei richiamare, perché è la lezione che in un certo senso mi hanno dato gli studenti in 30 e più anni di utilizzo, di ricezione e di trasmissione in aula delle prime pagine di Economia e Società, che io continuamente utilizzo e richiamo. Ed è questa osservazione che voglio condividere con voi. Ho l'impressione che oggi, negli ultimi anni, più che mai, sia possibile una utilizzazione viva dell'opera weberiana, proprio perché le letture dicotomiche che in passato hanno teso ad opporre una categoria all'altra, comunità e associazione, potenza e potere, la secolarizzazione con la tradizione religiosa, oggi la realtà sotto i nostri occhi mostra come la complementarietà dei fenomeni sociali richiede una rilettura dell'opera weberiana capace di tener conto che mentre c'è poca burocrazia, per esempio, efficiente in tante regioni italiane, c'è tanto neopatrimonialismo, che mentre va in crisi il partito di massa, il partito notabilare è più che mai forte e presente, che mentre aumentano la crisi delle istituzioni religiose, i preti antimafia rappresentano nuove forme di ascesi intramondana, che cioè le categorie weberiane sono vive a condizione di saperle fino in fondo, con Weber utilizzare e calare nel nostro lavoro quotidiano e nelle sfide di questo nostro tempo. Tanti fenomeni sono nuovi e ignoti, ovviamente, alla formulazione weberiana, dalla digitalizzazione, l'algocrazia, i nuovi fenomeni, i nuovi movimenti e tanti altri. però la strumentazione che Weber ci ha offerto, se correttamente utilizzata non in senso ideologico o schematico, ma invece come era già stato nell'insegnamento degli studi sulla modernizzazione, di tanti studi sulla modernizzazione, inserita nel mondo reale che è plurale e tormentato, e come mai in questi giorni, credo che l'opera weberiana possa risultare nella metodologia e nell'uso delle categorie più che mai valida e utile anche nelle cose che non è in grado, di cui non è in grado di dar conto, perché molto spesso il contributo di un classico è anche in ciò che ci dice su fenomeni che per altro verso non è pienamente in grado di inquadrare. E in questo senso l'ultima cosa con cui voglio salutare e dare l'augurio a questo nostro convegno è veramente questo tempo di crisi profonda, un tempo per l'homo sociologicus, quello fatto di affetti, tradizioni e memorie, razionalità allo scopo e valore, bisogni, in cui veramente gli idealtipi e la ricerca debba fare i conti con una ricerca di senso che riguarda lo scienziato e il mestiere del sociologo, ma che riguarda gli uomini e le donne del nostro tempo, nella costruzione della loro personalità e nella costruzione delle relazioni sociali in tutti i settori. E quindi con l'augurio di buon lavoro, grazie a tutti, grazie Maria Carmela per avermi dato buon lavoro.
Grazie, grazie. Entriamo a questo punto nel vivo dei lavori con la nostra prima sessione, che prende il titolo dal titolo che Hans-Peter Müller, che saluto, ha voluto dare alla sua relazione. Classic of the Classics, Max Weber in the 21st Century. Hans-Peter Müller, we are very glad to introduce now, is Professor Emeritus of General Sociology at the Humboldt University in Berlin and former chief editor of the Berliner Journal für Soziologie. He is now a member of the executive board of the German Sociological Association, so he is engaged and involved in the managing of a national sociological association, and his research interests are classical and contemporary social theory, social inequality, cultural sociology, and the conduct of life, a very Weberian concept. He has been a fellow, research fellow of the Harvard University, John Fitzgerald Kennedy Memorial Fellow at the Center for European Studies, and visiting chair at the Center for European Studies of New York University. He is also the author of many publications, and Zimmel Handbook with Ilma Reis, edited by Surkamp, in Max Weber, Heine Spurenzug, Berlin, Surkamp, and Max Weber Work and Wirkung, Max Weber Handbuch Lebenwerk Wirkung, Krisenkritik, Klassische Soziologie seit Dionysian. I am really honored and glad
Maria Carmela, ti si è disconnesso il microfono da solo. Ecco, no, ancora. Adesso va
So
bene.
I am really glad to give Professor Müller the floor for our opening keynote speech. Please, Professor Müller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Agodi. This is, of course, a great pleasure to talk to you today and to open this convenio on Max Weber. I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm not sure if we can upload it for you. So the question goes to Emanuele Madonia, if this is possible. Yes? Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the title, as you can see. And if we go to the second slide, you see in picture the books Professor Agodi just alluded to, all in 2020, but the new one is Max Weber, eine Spurensuche. The other two are in the second edition, particularly mentionable the handbook, which has been enlarged. And I will, third slide, I will, next slide, yes, give you an outline. These are the steps I will take. Three main steps: the making of an oeuvre, the cultivation of a classic, and Weber's lessons for the 21st century, framed by an introduction and conclusion. Let's go to the fourth slide. Here you see our cherished Max Weber. Thank you very much once again, really heartily, for this invitation. I'm greatly honored to talk to you. I would love to do this in co-presence. Unfortunately, we have to do it digital. The topic is the making of a classic, and the general thesis is classics are made, but the cultivation of an oeuvre is only successful if it still speaks to us in the 21st century. And classic of the classic was with the question marks. And so I can already open a secret, will be answered in the positive. After this talk, I hope there is an exclamation mark, and particularly after this week of conversations about Max Weber. Next slide. Well, classics do not fall from the sky and are suddenly among us. Classics are made. And the making of Max Weber is really an exciting and improbable story. Weber himself, would he be present among us today, would shake his head in disbelief that his oeuvre counts as one of the most important contributions in sociology. That Weber is seen on par with Goethe in poetry and Kant in philosophy today is a sensational development nobody could have foreseen 100 years ago in 1920. Because it was all of a sudden that Weber died on June 14, 1920 from pneumonia in the wake of the Spanish flu. The academic world back then was shocked by his sudden death and began to mourn a great personality. German academe had lost. The myth of Heidelberg, that was his nickname, was dead. Numerous obituaries followed celebrating this great German scholar and intellectual whose power of judgment, whose irresistible power of judgment would be missed in these difficult times after the First World War. Yet there was not much mention of an oeuvre Weber should have had written. Sure, he was known for the Protestant ethic and the discussions about this idealistic enterprise. Political economists reminded us of his investigations on rural and industrial workers, and he was known for his essay on the stock market. But that was about it. Maybe he was still feared for his obsessive struggle for value freedom. But that was it. That was it. Even his closest friends could not imagine that Max Weber had established an oeuvre that would propel him in the future to the status of being the classic of the classics in the cultural and social sciences. So, in the beginning, the personality beat the oeuvre, obviously non-existing in the eyes of his contemporaries. And this began to change as Marianne Weber went out to publish Weber's manuscripts. When the young American sociologist Talcott Parsons came to Heidelberg in the 1920s, he confessed that Weber's name had never been mentioned at the London School of Economics, where he had studied before coming to Heidelberg. This state of affairs is unbelievable for us, incredibile, given the fame of Weber today. Since then, he has long gone global. So my presentation tries to trace the road to success of Max Weber, the improbable classics, in 3 steps, as I said. To begin with, the story of the publication of his oeuvre is told up to 2020, when the critical edition was finally completed in 47 thick volumes and sub-volumes, making up to 54 books of Weber. We have now the entire Weber available. Then, and secondly, we outlined the relevant steps in the discussion of his oeuvre, which helped him to survive in the sociological discourse until today. Finally, and thirdly, we briefly turn to his major insights that brings him well into the 21st century. How much can still be learned from Weber? What are the crucial insights Weber inscribed into the DNA of sociology today? Next slide. Here are again those 3 steps to the road of success. So we come to the 7th slide, the making of an oeuvre. The general thesis here is, without Marianne Weber, there would be no Max Weber. Within 5 years after his premature death, she put out his collected essays in the fields of his research and crowned her editorial work with an intellectual biography of her husband. As she reports in her biographical account, Lebensbild, it was her mission and vision to establish the studies of her husband in the collective memory of sociology. In 1920, Max Weber himself had managed to submit the first part of Economy and Society in 3.5 chapters to the publishing house, as well as the first volume of the collected essays on the sociology of religion. After his death, and in the same year, 2020, Marianne edited the collected essays on politics and the 3rd volume of the collected essays on religion, that is, Judaism. In 1921 followed the 2nd volume, that is Hinduism and Buddhism, and in 1922 she put out Economy and Society, forming the book which since then became a classic. And in the same year, 2022, Weber's methodological essays under the title of Fichte, lent by Fichte, of Wissenschaftslehre. Under her tutorship, students of Weber, Sigmund Hellmann and Melchior Palay, published their notes, they're taken of Weber's last lecture on general economic history. And finally, in 24, Marianne put out the collected essays on social and economic history and the collected writings on sociology and social policy. Next slide, what an impressive achievement and significant service to our discipline within the speed of a lightning, particularly if one compares her swift editorial work to the historical critical edition of Weber's oeuvre constituted in 1973, editing the first volumes in 1984 and completing the business in 2020. So it is 5 years against almost 50 years. In between, Marianne Weber and the editors of the historical critical edition, under the guidance of Rainer Lepsius, was Johannes Winkelmann, and he needs to be mentioned in the history of the constitution of Weber's oeuvre, because he was the one who, a lawyer, who had intended to study under Weber in Munich, but when he arrived in the fall of 1920, Weber had already passed away. Since 1925, he stood in contact with Marianne Weber, consulting her in difficult editorial questions. And after his retirement, he started 1954 a second career as an honorary professor at the sociology department in Munich. And his main task was the creation of a Max Weber archive and a Max Weber Institute, making sure that everything, really everything, pertaining to the man and his oeuvre would be collected. So the Max Weber Arbeitsstelle at the Bavarian Academy of Science became the institutional platform for the growing research on Weber. And it was him who initiated the historical critical edition, first in 1973 with Horst Bayer and Wolfgang Mommsen, and later on with Rainer Lepsus and Wolfgang Schluchter. And when Mommsen died in 2004, Gangolf Hübinger, an historian and a student of Mommsen, joined the editorial board. 50 years of work, but only in 1975, a contract of 3 pages, which the editors, the Bavarian Academy of Science, and Weber's publishing house, Mohr-Siebeck in Tübingen, concluded. 3 pages. But they were crucial. The edition would be divided into 3 parts. First, writings and speeches. Second, letters. And third, lectures and lecture notes. 9th slide, please. Now, in 2020, you could ask what is new under the sun after we have all these books by Max Weber. I think 3 main results should be noted. First of all, the classic Economy and Society, as we've come to know it, does not exist anymore. The editors were convinced that the compilation of Marianne Weber, arguing the first part is systematic, that is concept formation, the second part revealed the historical illustration of economy and society, that this editorial decision is wrong. Rather, Weber began to systematize his approach to sociology using the old manuscripts as a foundation. That is, in this preliminary status of these so-called historical writings, he would never have published the older versions. Economy and Society is therefore now the title for Weber's own version of 3.5 manuscripts, including the basic concepts, the sociology of economy, the sociology of domination, and his brief chapter on class and status order, Klasse und Stand. That is, his incomplete sociology of inequality. That is, concepts, economy, domination, and inequality. This is the founding rock of Weber's approach. And that is very important to see this. That is the constituents of Weber's approach. The older manuscripts are entitled The Economy and the Societal Orders and Powers, Legacy, and are divided into 5 booklets: communities, religious communities, law, domination, and the city. And the interesting question will be, if we, the international community of Weber scholars, really buy into this new version of economy and society, or if we stick to the old version. 10th slide, please. The second profound change pertains to the Wissenschaftslehre. The title Marianne had given Weber's epistemological and methodological reflections was abandoned, and instead of 1 volume, we have now 2 volumes. Volume 1 is entitled Zur Logik und Methodik der Sozialwissenschaften. That is the collected essays between 1900 and 1907. They give the logic and methods of the social sciences. And Volume 2 deals with Verstehen der Soziologie und Werturteilsfreiheit. This is the collected essays between 1908 and 1917. Well, there can be no doubt that this will be the definitive edition of Weber's contributions on this issue, and at least for experts, will and must replace the old version. And yet, Marianne Weber had a great intuition, employing the Fichtean term. Like Fichte, Weber's reflections are much more than methodology, but discuss the mindset of modern man, the habitus of sobriety and probity, matter-of-factness and distance, value and value freedom, as well as the basic questions of the modern conduct of life. Like in some other parts of the oeuvre, particularly in the sociology of religion, these reflections offer a glimpse into Weber's Weltanschauung or Weltbild, his worldview, in other words. So Wissenschaftslehre was in so far a very apt term to deliver the wider horizon beyond methodological technicalities. 11th slide. The third novelty of the historical edition present the letters. Weber was a prolific writer of letters to his families, to his colleagues, and to his publishing house. Almost 3,500 letters have gone into the edition, and of course, even this huge collection is incomplete. The letters to Georg Simmel and to Werner Sombart are desperately missing. Fortunately, the letters to Roberto Michels could be found in the Fondazione Luigi Einaudi. But also very intimate letters were published after fierce inner debate, I can tell you. If love letters, never meant to see the light of the day, should really become public. Now, it is the unfortunate fate of classics that the curious public, we are all so curious, wants to know everything about their cherished ones. So, for readers interested in the erotic life of Weber, the 109 letters of Mina Tobler, Weber's piano teacher and beloved one since 1911, and the 71 letters of Else Jaffe von Richthofen, who destroyed 23 of them, turning from longtime friend to lover in 1918, are particularly revealing. Weber, the lover. The body of letters show that we should in fact talk about two Webers, not one. The one, publicly known and admired ever since, is ascetic, disciplined, and activity. So far, he resembles the methodical rational conduct of life that he portrays so convincingly in his Protestant ethic. This image of intellectual honesty turned him into the role model of a disinterested scholar, academic teacher, and public intellectual. The complex and difficult manner of his writing style and the few fierce portraits, I showed you one of them, that we have of him, testified to this stern image. This is the public, serious Weber. But there is a second one that the letters bring to light. Weber as a human being, struggling with his demons well before his nervous breakdown in 1898, passionate, emphatic, and of amiable politeness, as well as full of cordial attention for others, if attention and care is needed. This is the private, if you like, humane Weber. But this second section of his oeuvre, the letters, is even more interesting in still another respect. On the one hand, they help to understand his oeuvre much better. But on the other hand, the letters could be regarded as a second oeuvre next to the first one we know better. Particularly Rainer Lepsius, who edited many of those volumes of letters, told me that this is really a second work. But these volumes offer also the facets of an overall picture of the Kaiserreich, its politics, its debates and conflicts, their universities and the organization. Okay. Since Weber was such a lucid observer, the accounts he has given are vivid and lively. And still another point becomes utterly clear. There is a big discussion in the secondary literature when Weber became a sociologist. Now, this question is now answered. His travelogues show that he is a genuine sociologist from the outset, the way he characterizes foreign countries and its people. And so far, Weber was a sociologist well before he developed his own sociology. And this brings us now to the 12th slide, the cultivation of a classic, and the second step. Now, thanks to Marianne Weber's editorial work, Max Weber was not entirely forgotten after his death. But the furnishing of an oeuvre is one thing, the reception another. For some scholars and intellectuals, Weber defined the guideline for their own work. Karl Jaspers, for instance, saw in Max Weber the macro-anthropos of the modern world. And the Weber work scientifically became the role model for Jaspers' own existential philosophy. We mentioned Talcott Parsons, who was infected by the Weber virus once he had arrived in Heidelberg, despite the fact that he had never heard of him before. Low-key. He was pressed, and thanks to his oeuvre, accessible, but Weber played no decisive role, but was more a kind of background figure. And that is because Weimar sociology turned away from grand theory and directed its attention to concrete social problems. What went under the label of theory became more or less Wissenssoziologie, Karl Mannheim's term. And Karl Mannheim is a good case in point because he stood on the shoulders of Max Weber, no doubt about that, but he's almost invisible in his oeuvre. The same holds true for Norbert Elias and his civilization process. Those two books, if you look at these books closer, in theoretical terms, you find that in macro sociology, he relies on Max Weber, and in micro sociology, he relies on Sigmund Freud. But again, here we find the strategy of invisibilization. So Weber is present, but not visible. And this was actually continued in the Third Reich. As you know, when the Nazis came into power in 1933, sociology turned folkish, as it was called, folk sociology. Weber did not get on the index of forbidden authors, and therefore his books were not burned. Christoph Steding, for instance, who wrote his dissertation on Max Weber, published his book Das Reich und die Krankheit der europäischen Kultur in 1938, trying to analyze the crisis of European culture by relying on Weberian arguments. Hans Freyer, another one, put forward Soziologie als Wirklichkeitswissenschaft, using Weber's own definition of sociology as a science of reality. As a member of the conservative revolution, he was successful to topple Ferdinand Tönnies in 1933 as president of the German Sociological Association. After the Second World War, Freyer softened his tone and characterized the contemporary times in Weberian terms of rationalization and secularization in order to develop a new conservatism in his Theorie des gegenwärtigen Zeitalters. His students, Arnold Gehlen and Helmut Schelsky, would continue this line of thinking well into the Federal Republic of Germany. Now, American scholars, and this is the 13th slide, American scholars took Max Weber much more seriously. Frank Knight, for instance, a co-founder of the neoclassical Chicago School of Economics, discovered the genius in Weber's last theory of capitalism and translated and economic history.
C'è da fare su Weber perché c'è
Sorry?
quanti anni sono, insomma, un anniversario, 100 anni dal
C'è un
suo
microfono
Sorry.
acceso, attenzione, attenzione.
Professor, excuse me, your microphone is off.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it's
Can
okay.
you? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mentioned Talcott Parsons, who wrote his dissertation under the supervision of Edgar Salin and with support by Alfred J. Weber, the younger brother of Max. He published in 1928 his famous essay on capitalism in recent German literature, Sombart and Weber, which was accepted as a doctoral dissertation. And then he began translation work, the Protestant Ethic for the first time in 1930. In 1937, he brought out his own masterpiece, The Structure of Social Action, in 2 volumes, and the second volume was exclusively devoted to Max Weber. But unfortunately, at that time, during the Nazi pressure, and we were about to enter a Second World War, nobody had in the US had much interest in grand theory. And so Parsons' appropriation of Max Weber was not rediscovered before 1968, when a paperback edition of this marvelous masterpiece appeared. So you can see, to cut a long story short, that Weber, due to this translation work of his writings into English, also propelled by Jewish emigres like Hans Gerd and Reinhard Bendix, he became almost an American author. Max Weber turned American, if you like, at least after the Second World War. And as part and parcel of the reception of American sociology in Germany, Weber was re-imported to Germany and had his breakthrough in 1964 at the famous meeting of the German Sociological Association in Heidelberg, Max Weber and Sociology Today, where all players at that time, intellectual players in the sociological field were there, particularly the Frankfurt School, with Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Jürgen Habermas, and from the US, Herbert Marcuse. He was actually, by the left, seen as one forerunner of Adolf Hitler, because his infelicitous role of charismatic leadership made him into a spiritual forerunner of Nazi Germany. But this was vehemently rejected by Talcott Parsons and others, Raymond Aron, for that matter, who stressed the liberal legacy of Max Weber. But what was important was that this controversy was the starting signal to delve into Max Weber's oeuvre much more deeply, with philological care and theoretical interest, and that is, if you like, the beginning of the immense reception of Max Weber. And from then, the reception took off for 3 reasons. First of all, politically. You could say that the East-West conflict was intellectually translated into the struggle between East and West, was the struggle between Marx and Weber. And so the German Democratic Republic started immediately an edition of Marx's writings, and the Federal Republic of Germany, of course, had to follow suit. And there was, if you like, a Cold War of intellectual cultures. And scientifically, This was one good reason why West Germany put so much money into the historical critical edition that would amount to an equally impressive number of volumes like the Marx Engels edition. And just to give you one, I think, interesting point here, anecdote, if you look at volume 23 of the Marx Engels edition and Max Weber's edition, you will see that the heroes are confronted directly with their main oeuvre, Capital by Marx versus Economy and Society by Max Weber, and that this is no coincidence. In this rivalry between political systems and intellectual cultures, Weber grew more and more into the shining light of the West as the quintessential liberal and champion of freedom, with a positive attitude towards a dynamic capitalism and towards a representative democracy based upon an individualistic culture. So it is no coincidence that the Western model is based upon these three pillars. The economic game consists of capitalism, the political game is about democracy, and the cultural game professes individualism. Yet what started as a bitter rivalry, Marx against Weber, grew more and more into Marx and Weber as the classical building blocks of social theory. And he became, if you like, particularly for Western Marxism, a very important foundation for their own reconstructed Marxism. So Max Weber, the bourgeois Marx, became the sobering experience for many Marxist intellectuals. Pierre Bourdieu in France and Anthony Giddens in England constituted what could be called a left Weberianism. So all of a sudden, due to this massive reception, Max Weber was open to all political camps, the conservative one, Raymond Aron in France, Daniel Bell in the US, the liberal one, Parsons and Merton in the US, and the progressive ones, Bourdieu and Giddens. And this is really an impressive development. Just look at critical theory and the Frankfurt School. They are highly skeptical of Weber, the bourgeois Marx, but deeply influenced by him. Take, for instance, The Dialectics of Enlightenment by Horkheimer and Adorno. This book dramatizes Weber's biggest concern, the bureaucratization of the world, into an inescapable fate, and returns in Adorno's oeuvre as the fear of an administered world full of alienation, die verwaltete Welt. That is the diagnosis of the time by Adorno. In the theory of communicative action by Habermas, Habermas replaces Marx and Freud for Max Weber and Jean Piaget in critical theory, and his diagnosis of the times, the loss of freedom and the loss of meaning, reads like a continuation of Weber's considerations. And the philosophical discourse of modernity by Habermas opens with Weber's problem, why the West took off to modernity. So we see Weber's impact grew larger and larger, and what was invisible in the beginning, in Weimar and during the Nazi era, becomes obvious from latency to full transparency that Weber is connectable to all kinds of political and intellectual camps. And so it is no coincidence that at the peak of this development, the International Sociological Association in 1998 chose 2 volumes by Weber, Economy and Society and the Protestant Ethic, as the most important works in sociology in the 20th century. In Germany, the story goes on with a kind of institutionalization of the name of Max Weber. Because in 2002, the Max Weber Foundation was constituted as the roof under which all German institutes of humanities in the world are run. They are all called now Max Weber Institutes. Since 2012, the 10 institutes in Beirut, Istanbul, London, Moscow, Paris, Rome, Tokyo, Warsaw, and Washington, D.C. are called Max Weber Institutes. That is, by elevating Weber's name onto the level of representative institutions, a person turns into an institution, according to Arnold Gehl's famous definition. I quote, a personality that is an institution in one case. So the global dissemination of his name keeps Weber alive in the collective memory of the world forever, independent from his fate of the status as a sociological classic. And therefore, this is why I said that he's now almost on par with Goethe and the Goethe Institutes. In 2014, his 150th anniversary, he got a stamp covering his head, 3 new biographies, and a handbook. And in 2020, the centenary of his death, we are celebrating, saw a host of digital conferences and workshops. And one could say no social scientist, maybe with the exception of Karl Marx, ever encountered such an honor and distinction. And the digital age makes it possible to measure the prominence of persons and their communicative standing in the world. And it is Karl Marx and Max Weber who by far are the top 2 of the most globally disseminated sociologists on multilingual Wikipedia, a study which I did with Pablo Baitia, a Chilean doctorand of mine, in 2019. It seems as if Weber finally made a powerful return into his home country again, yet he is no longer American or German, but has gone global and belongs to mankind. Yeah. So let me, and we come to the 14th slide, come to my last point, last step, Weber's lessons for the 21st century. Here, of course, I have to be very brief. Weber himself would never, ever have imagined such a success a centenary after his death. He thought really modestly of his own sociological attempts and knew that scientific progress passes by old achievements very, very fast. So this improbable staying power of his thought and the fascination for the person is really difficult to explain. Why Weber and what for? And I will only really, in broad strokes, in 5 keywords, give you a hunch of why Weber in the 21st century will still be with us. First, the genealogy of capitalism and modernity. Both Marx and Weber, if you like, inimical brothers in arms, share the same preoccupation with capitalism as the most fateful power of our modern life, as Weber says. But Marx wants to define the laws of capitalistic production once and for all, in a natural scientific misunderstanding, whereas Weber studies its forms with a focus on Western and here modern Western capitalism. And this perspective, really historical perspective, makes him a forerunner of the varieties of capitalism approach. So capitalism is, and this is really shown by Weber very vividly and clearly, like a chameleon and a quick change artist. It can assume any form as long as money can be made. And the capitalism of today has a totally different outer appearance than the industrial capitalism Weber envisaged, or Marx. The irresistible staying power of capitalism is as great as the classic status of Marx and Weber. As long as capitalism reigns modern life, Marx and Weber, as their greatest theoreticians, will be read. That would be the thesis. First keyword. Second keyword, the historical efficacy of ideas. At the beginning, there had to be, that was Weber's idea, had to be a carrier group which made this perverse system, and capitalism is a perverse system, possible. It counts as normal to work in order to live, but not to live in order to work. Weber asked himself how work regarded as labor could suddenly be seen as self-fulfillment. This is the hour of birth of the Protestant ethic. Weber finds in the Puritans a carrier group who turned the sufferings from the dogma of predestination around in their practice to work hard for their calling. And due to their great success, the Puritans established the modern achievement society. And foreshadowing an argument of mimetic institutionalism, Weber showed that what began in the Puritan business practices was mimicked, was imitated by the rest of society. Now, this holds an interesting lesson to be learned how ideas are realized. Never intentione recta, that is pure and direct, but always impure and indirect with unforeseen and unintended consequences. Take the Protestant ethic. Jean Calvin and Richard Baxter, dogmatist and practitioner of Puritanism, did not want to introduce godless capitalism. To the contrary, they wanted to make possible a purely religious conduct of life. But they created the spirit that became the ethical backer of modern capitalism. Because of these perverse effects, effets pervers calls them Raymond Boudon, of pure ideas, Weber does not share Marx's optimism that socialism would form a better society. Contrary to Marx, he sees no viable exit option in socialism, as he shows in a talk in Vienna in 1980. The pathos of equality notwithstanding, and Weber has much sympathy for equality, rational socialism means the fusion of economy and state, creating an overpowering Leviathan, leaving no freedom to breathe for the society and its people. It creates a mighty nomenclatura, and since socialism equals progress, political protest against it appears like an attack on the good society in the making. And that was the result, the punishment for resisting individuals, and means the exile into the gulag in order to be re-educated. And the Chinese continue this with the Uyghurs in China. What began with a pure idea of equality ends up in state socialism with the highest possible level of political inequality between rulers and ruled as an unintended consequences. For Weber, socialism is bureaucratization on even a higher scale and therefore does not equal progress, a muddled concept Weber most strongly disliked. He hated this concept of progress. 15th slide. Concept formation as or is theory building. Weber compact terms and emotionally uploaded notions like socialism should not be used in the social sciences. This is one reason why Weber saw in precise and clear-cut concepts the royal avenue for theory building. And therefore, concept formation is theory building. So Weber's work is full of ideal types, a rich gold mine for the cultural and social sciences until today. The fourth keyword is social history, not social theory. Weber shies away from the attempt to develop a grand theory. He prefers a kind of social history, Gesellschaftsgeschichte in German, not an encompassing social theory, that is, Gesellschaftstheorie. Social reality cannot be exhausted analytically, but concepts are formed with respect to well-defined problems. So Weber's approach resembles a toolkit applicable to many situations and constellations. He does not go for a system like Talcott Parsons or Niklas Luhmann, but rather pursues a systematics. And this systematics consists of element for a theory of action, of order, and of culture, as Wolfgang Schluchter showed, that can be used for historical, empirical analysis of constellations, as Rainer Lepsus tried to demonstrate. And in this combination of theoretical design and the modeling logics for constellations, one might see Weber's paradigm for historical comparative research. And this brings me to the last keyword, the conduct of life. Lebensführung in German. It forms the alpha and omega of Weber's approach. Society should be there for the human beings and not for the economy or polity. Weber, as a liberal thinker, tried to figure out what the modern individual, striving for freedom and cultivating his or her individuality, can do against the two superpowers, capitalism and the modern state. How is a sovereign conduct of life possible, given the maelstrom of the bureaucratic machines of economy and politics? Weber did not turn a blind eye to the dark side of capitalism, creating massive social inequality in the midst of dazzling wealth. Here he is absolutely in line with Karl Marx. But he held the dynamic of this economic system absolutely necessary as a competitive shield against the bureaucratic freezing capacity of ever-growing state power. It is as Weber imagined a model of countervailing powers, capitalism against the state, in favor of freedom and individuality of modern human beings. But the vanishing point of Weber's sociology is the conduct of life. Let me conclude. This is the 16th slide. In a way, Weber may not be the macro-anthropos of our modern world any longer. The pace of change and transformation has even more accelerated since his time. But he conceptualized modern society according to capitalism, democracy, and individualism. And he discussed strains and contradictions of this modern form of existence in a very in which to convey to us the choices, the chances, and the restrictions when it comes to the existential question, how should we lead our life? Like his friend and colleague Georg Simmel, he alluded to a kind of individual law, that is Simmel's term, in which everybody should find the demon that holds the thread of one's life, of one's own life. Never, ever in the history of mankind were the life chances for freedom and individuality as high as today. But it is also true that the individual, quite like the lonely Puritan begging for salvation, is bound to his or her self-reliance in order to find the right way of leading a life fulfilled. Live or you are lived. That seems to be the categorical imperative of Weber in the wake of Kantian thinking. If there's anything mystical or metaphysical in Max Weber's thought, it is his wish for nurturing the nobility of mankind, der Adel des Menschentums, as he puts it, instead of mere well-being. Maybe this is a last and hidden insight deeply buried in the underlying philosophy of Weber's thought. We may not be living in Weber's times anymore, but we still have to make a living and to lead our life under the predicament of late modernity. In this sense, then, we still stand on the shoulders of Max Weber, the giant of sociology in the 21st century. That is my last thesis, and I thank you for your patience and attention.
Thank you, Professor Müller, for this, well, impressive and very, very interesting reconstruction of the make-out of Weber as a classic, but also for the sketch of what you think to be its main thought about our destiny. and about the concept of conduct of life and its centrality as the intersection, if I may say, among economics, politics, and culture. I think a lot of questions and issues now may come from the floor, but to begin our discussion, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Giuseppe Sciortino first, and then to Professor Gregor Fizzi. Professor Sciortino is a full professor in the Department of Sociology and Political and Social Research in the University of Trento, where he is also pro-rector of the evaluation of research and talents. He has an international standing, especially in the study of migration, and recently has been contributing edited book by Jeffrey Alexander, Stark, and Cosco Hever about breaching the civic order, radicalism, and the civil society. And he has been working about the diverse theoretical roots of the concept of migration regimes. Professor Gregor Fizzi is interim full professor for general sociology and sociological theory at the Faculty of Sociology of the University of Bielefeld, Germany. And his main interest areas are intercultural integration, sociological theory, history of sociology, and political sociology. And he is the editor of the 16th volume of Georg Zimmel's collected works. So I'll give the floor to them to open our discussion, and I'll be listening to them. Please, Professor Sciortino. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having invited me, for having organized such conference, and for having given me the privilege of reading in advance Professor Müller's paper. My gratitude is even bigger for the very simple reason that I'm not a Weber expert, as most people will know. I'm just somebody who has read Weber at various stages of his career, as I guess most of the people in this virtual room. Now, when I was reading the paper by Professor Müller, and when I was clearly thinking about what to say today, I couldn't avoid thinking of the times in which I read Weber and the ways in which my experience, my life as a sociologist, now that I'm old, and the sociology I knew in the various periods of my life interacted with the ways in which Weber has been interpreted in various periods and times and contexts. And how this would fit or not fit, of course, with the paper I was supposed to comment. Now, the first time I read Weber was in the mid-80s, when I was a student. And I reread again it several times. And the first difference of the first stuff I would like to comment on Peter Müller's work is that in my wrongful beginnings, when I made a bad choice to become a sociologist in the mid-80s, I would have never thought of Weber as the classic of classics. In other words, as the superstar in the pantheon of sociology. It's not that I'm not disputing his assessment, which is clearly correct, on the fact that Weber has become the king, to use the rock and roll term, or that any popularity matrix from Google Scholar to whatever clearly reveal that he is the most quoted and referred sociologist at the moment on the planet. I'm not criticizing his empirical assessment, which is completely correct. And also on the fact that Weber has become an icon of global sociology in a way. As far as I know, nobody has ever done a graffiti of Durkheim in the center of Paris, as example, and Pareto clearly survives also on footnotes, and some has been used by some mathematicians, but nothing really global or similarly. The point is, should we really celebrate the success of Weber in these terms? Because the cult of ancestor I was introduced to in the mid-80s was much more egalitarian and was pointing to a much wider and broader and diverse pantheon. It was still in many ways Talcott Parsons' pantheon, the one in which, by the way, he didn't intend to, he just ended up creating this pantheon of, let's say, Durkheim, Pareto, Weber, and as junior members, Zimmel and Tönnies. In the meanwhile, in the 60s revolutionaries had succeeded in adding Karl Marx to this pantheon, but they had become the boring professor I was exposed to in the mid-80s, so, okay. And Parsons himself had made another creation, bringing Mead to the pantheon. So that was more or less the pantheon I grew up as a young guy. And these were the authors and the people I spent many hours a day for many years reading, discussing, criticizing, and whatever. I don't regret it. They've been probably the best times of my life, and surely nothing I did later has been as pleasurable as reading all these people. But from that pantheon, which is much more than the Weber, Marx, Weber that Professor Müller keeps insisting as a key element, you basically learn, and I learned at least three things which I've always found useful in subsequent years. The first is that a small group of very talented individuals had started working on very similar issues independently. And sometimes, and that's the part that I always found fascinating, ignoring each other at all, like Durkheim and Weber. We know that Durkheim was reading Weber's journal. We know that he criticized Marian Weber's book, but we don't have, as far as I know, I don't know if the letters brings any news, any kind of direct contact or any direct confrontation between the two, which I found extraordinary. So since the very beginning, sociology was very fragmented. Okay, we like to call it pluralistic, but actually was fragmented, where many sociologists interacting, which is still the case. And despite my devotion to my classic of choice, Talcott Parsons, his convergent thesis just don't hold waters. Those people didn't converge in a single framework later. The second was that and this is also interesting, none of these people would define themselves as sociologists. Peter Müller has made a case that Parsons was, that Weber was unknowingly sociologist even before accepting to call it so, but I would take his own word. His word was that he was a political economist. He always claimed, if I remember well, quite proudly of being this, with some sociological interests, which is great because in a world in which disciplinary boundaries are very strong and ever growing, the idea that we come from a disciplines which don't really care about disciplinary boundaries is probably the only legitimation for being in that discipline. Or at least that's my only legitimation for the. In other words, growing in a pantheon with a pantheon which is unruly, divergent, contradictory, and largely indifferent to academic and professional boundaries, that's a great training ground. And so I'm a bit regretting the idea that people today are exposed to a much smaller rank and by opposite pantheon like Marx, Weber, Weber, Marx, Marx, Weber, Weber, Marx. I'm not really sorry for them for a very second reason, which I suspect Max Weber popularity is unfortunately linked to the shallowness of the acquaintances of people with Max Weber. In other words, he has become so famous, unfortunately, precisely because very few people today spend those years reading for many hours classics, as I was used to do. In other words, as any old people, I like to remember the good old times and criticize the contemporary time, but the point is, at my age, it was inconceivable for somebody considering an academic career in sociology without going through those deep, sustained lectures. Today, I would say, is probably the majority of the young cohort of sociology, which pay to them lip service, if they feel the need to pay lip service to it. Let's say classics scholarship has become a minority test, a niche. A niche I'm pretty proud to be part of, but it's still a pretty small niche. And we see it in the case of Weber from two things. What does classic function for? For two things. Training the new cohort of the discipline, and we have seen this is not anymore important, and legitimizing new research and challenging to the status quo in the discipline. Well, the last time Weber was used to legitimize a challenge to the status quo was basically quarter a century ago, when rational choice theory tried to use Weber to legitimize the adoption of an individual methodological rationalist approach to social action and whatever. It didn't work, mostly because they realized they could legitimize themselves without calling themselves Weberians in a way. And so the attempts by Raymond Boudon or John Elster to use it to create a new rational choice sociology weren't really necessary. They could go on without it. So it's at this point, Professor Müller, like I would do probably with my student, tries to persuade us that there are some parts of Max Weber which are still of contemporary relevance for today. And I would agree with him on the 5 issues he stresses. But the point is, and on this is not a critique to Professor Müller, because it's what actually Professor Müller wrote in the introduction to his very good and very successful book on Weber. The world of today is not a world that Max Weber envisioned, and actually is not a world that Max Weber would have liked. We are in the middle of a tremendous expansion, COVID-driven, of the welfare state, as example, which will, with the level of public debts which I've never seen in the history of humanity before on the global level. We are living within a mass democracy with no real leader, and no one better than Italians know that. We are living in a deeply secularized culture in which personal responsibility has basically no role, or is very trivial and residual character. None of the elements of Max Weber visions are today contemporary. And I could quote many other elements, which I would say. There are people, and I think they're right, which says that the 2 huge challenges of contemporary society, the sustainability of the current model in environmental terms, and the boundaries between human and artificial, are, of course, stuff that Max Weber was not even able to conceive, like anybody at the time. And to finish and to conclude, well, I don't think Weber would love contemporary sociology very much. He would surely not like the emphasis for advocacy for downtrodden group and politicization, which goes now under the name of sociological theory most of the time. And he wouldn't like the idea of alternative to capitalism or opposition to neoliberalism. If there were a liberal sociologist, that would have been Max Weber. My favorite sentence by him is when he said basically that he didn't have tolerance for the stupid outcry of the literati against capitalism, which is still a very pretty instructive argument. And of course, his stock market argument that financiarization is not the evil, but actually is the necessary development of capitalism and so on. So why should we read Max Weber? Well, my solution would be complementary probably to Professor Müller, and it's we should read Max Weber like any other classics precisely because it's useless. I didn't invent this solution. It's actually my colleague, who's a respected Weberian, Gianfranco Poggi, who created it a few years after I was finishing my PhD, when he published a paper called Lego Qui Inutile, which is a make-up Latin for, I read it just because it's useless. And the point is, classics, and Max Weber in particular, are not made to explain contemporary society. That's our job. They are here to do something deeply anti-modern, which is freeing us from the delusion that we are the first to deal with certain social dynamics or to face certain unsettling change. Weber introduced us to a different, alternative world, a foreign world, country where the classic authors do things differently from us. When they are incredibly good, and Weber is incredibly good, classics provide us with the same estrangement that science fiction does. It's not the world as it is, but it's the world as it could have been, or sometimes as it should have been. It's provide, in other words, what we desperately need in sociological theory, the aid for a sluggish imagination, and it's not small feat. So thanks to Weber and all to us for talking about him.
Thank you, Professor Shortino. And well, just a provocative way to speak about Weber as not speaking about and not speaking for the understanding of our society. And well, I can say I agree in the sense that Weber has not any duty to understand our society because this is not the society he was in front of, but what Weber did is to teach us or to give us inspiration to go underneath the surface, the immediate phenomenology of what our contemporary society seem to be, and to give us an understanding of what does it mean to use and to invent concepts as a way of doing theoretical work. I think this is something sociology needs today, and I also think I can say that ten Broek was right when he said that after Weber, notwithstanding the lip service which was paid to him as a classic, we have not had a Weberian sociology. So I now give the forum to Professor Gregor Fizzi, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Agodi, for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here to see everybody. And of course, would like to thank Hans-Peter Müller for his very rich and intensive presentation. I think this is it's very important to stress one point, because Hans-Peter Müller is the representative also of tradition. There is this German tradition of re-establishing a sort of inquiry into Weber's work, and also asking the question, where do we find Weber's work? Because this is one of the main problems in this field. And so I find it very interesting that Hans-Peter showed us that there is a very complex history of reception, that we deal with very different images of Max Weber, and we see that these images have a strong impact still on today's discussions. Lots of people have an image of Weber, they don't know where this image comes from, so it is very important that Hans-Peter shows us that there were different political conflicts in the history of the 20th century, in which the different images of Max Weber were constructed. So if you want to dig in the work of or the oeuvre of Max Weber, we need to be conscious about these contexts, because if we understand Weber images in the context they were produced, maybe we can come nearer to what is Weber's oeuvre, and we not stay by the images, in the consciousness that it's very difficult to get till the oeuvre, because we have different oeuvres. And that was another aspect I did very much like in the presentation, to show us we have different oeuvres. One is in the letters, and maybe we should really start to read also systematically these letters and so on. So, and then of course, it's for me, what addresses me very strongly is the question, what are the lessons for the 21st century? I would just like to pick out some of the points, because otherwise I have to talk too long. I mean, one aspect that was addressed also by Shortino, and I think is very interesting. The question is Weber, like some interpreters also point out, the liberal or the neoliberal thinker of society? And we know that on the other side, other scholars point out that Weber could be seen in some way as implicit socialist, and because he has a very strong criticism toward the development of capitalist economy and the society. So what is the point? And I think it's very important that Hans-Peter addressed this problem, because to understand what is Weber's criticism of socialism is in some way also a way to understand what could be the Weber's position about neoliberalism, because the criticism of socialism for Weber is in the first instance a criticism of confusion between two different logics of societal structuration. We have on the one side the logic of economics, and on the other side we have the logic of politics. If we try to mix up the two logics, we will have a problem. So the issue is in some way, what is important for Weber is to show the point for modernity, for modern society, is not to choose economy or politics. The point is how to manage that we don't mix up different structuration logics, and what kind of societal arrangement can we find in order to achieve this goal. And this is evidently a problem, and this is something that following Weber we can only understand if we analyze it on an empirical basis, but the interest inside of Weber, and this the way why I like that Hans-Peter stresses this, is that he wants to show us modern society cannot function if you have colonization processes going from one societal domain to another. So with real existing socialism, in some way we had the colonization of economics by politics. With the neoliberalism, we have the opposite direction. The economy has colonized politics since the 1980s, and now we have the big consequences of these problems, and we should find out how to separate once again the two logics and to enforce the political logics, also in the debate about the consequences of the pandemic and so on. So this is one point. The other point which was interesting for me is this very interesting dichotomy Hans-Peter proposed us. It's not a matter of theory building, of sociological grand theory. It is a matter of concept formation. This means what Weber proposes us is no ontology. It's not the analysis of what society really is. On the opposite, it delivers us instruments in order to analyze the social reality, and also a methodology to produce new instruments, because of course he was analyzing his society and we must analyze our society, no? And I agree with all the interveners about this point. So, but he proposes us a methodology to do this, and I think this is one of the central points that help us also to face the current development of our societies, because we face a number of social phenomena, and we very often have a very intensive impression that we are not master of the situation, that we don't understand that all the things that are happening in economy, in politics, in the relationship between society and the environment are all things that are natural catastrophes, and we are not anymore able to manage, to face, to understand. So if we go back to what Weber can offer us, and I think this is in some way also the message of Hans-Peter's new book about Max Weber, we find there instruments that we can use to face our reality. So if we use these instruments, we can of course start to overcome also the problem, the central problem we have, that is this the loss of sociological theory, because the impression everybody has, I've heard this also this morning, is sociologists are able to produce a number of analysis about different phenomena of society. But what we miss is the capacity of analyzing the whole frame. We are not anymore able to produce what we could expect from a science. We are just, and so what is the way that can bring us in the other direction and restart the capacity not of explaining everything, because nobody pretends to do this, but at least to understand what are some tendencies and how we can explain how these tendencies are transforming our societies. And so if we go in this direction, I think Weber is the best author we have to understand some fundamental transformations of our societies. We face these conflicts and colonization processes between different societal domains. What at the time of Weber was called the conflict between the cultural spheres. So how can we manage this problem? We face a substantial normative intermittency of all our societal structures. They exist, they are created, they have validity, but this validity is not strong enough to dominate the transformation of society. And we oscillate between construction of normative structures and destruction of normative structure, and this oscillation is making out one of the biggest problems complex societies have today. Weber delivers a huge amount of instruments to face this kind of the development, to face the problem of failing societal structuration. So, and at the end, last but not least, the biggest problem also, and this is my last point, Hans-Peter addressed, is how should we understand today if conduct of life in the meaning of an independent construction of a way of life, not only of individuals, but also of collective subject. The collective subject once existed in modern societies, and that determined also the possibility of normative structuration of modern society in the meaning of the welfare state after the Second World War, and all these debates. These subjects today do not exist anymore and have not the possibility to constitute themselves in something that really works, and we miss an explanation of these processes, why it is like this, why it is so difficult for individuals to construct an independent and autonomous conduct of life, and what can sociology tell us about these developments. And of course, if I take Weber's book in the hand, I don't have the feeling that I've read it because it is completely unuseful. There is an enormous amount. Our problem is that this enormous amount of instruments is delivered to us through a reception history that is very difficult, and so there is lots of confusion, but we can dig in and we can, of course, find something there. So I don't know, to put it to a final point. Maybe the most interesting question is to say, would Weber today sing in the core of neoliberals, or would Weber say in another part of our socio-political universe, this is maybe the question only Hans-Peter can ask. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you to you, Gregor Fitzi. And before giving to Professor Müllers the opportunity to answer to the comments of Professor Shortino and Professor Fitzi, I would like to give the floor to for some questions and comments. Also to, well, I see now Professor Laura Leonardi from the University of Florence. And then we have Professor Magatti, Mauro Magatti, and then Professor Sandro Segre, and Professor Paolo Volontè, who will intervene for some questions and comments. So, please, Professor Laura Leonardi.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity
to... sorry, Laura, please, your microphone, can you approach, or please make it louder, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for your inspiring speech, Professor Müller. I am particularly interested in your thesis that the conduct of life is crucial in Weber's work. It is the last phrase in your last slide. It is the alpha and omega of his work. So, and you also argued in several articles and in your books this thesis. Conduct of life is the link between the individuals and society. You affirm that one could say that Weber uses the concept as an independent and as a dependent variable at the same time. As an independent variable because a social constellation can push its members to adopt the conduct of life. In this sense, the society determines the conduct of life, which entails an adaptation to the situation. But the conduct of life is also an independent variable. It seeks to assess the extent to which culture, values, and ideas can influence the social constellations. And it is a concept that catches the central problem for the individual within modernity, that is to be able to lead one's life, in particular to solve for himself, herself, the problem of freedom and that of sense. And so the concept of conduct of life is related to the problem of how to realize our self-determination and to try to reconcile our individuality with the challenges of modernity. And a concept that in today's world has found a simplified and ambivalent expression in the rhetoric of being one's own entrepreneur. So we can see that contemporary research has not really followed Max Weber's program of conduct of life analysis, because conceptually it has shifted from conduct of life to lifestyle. And there is also a translation from German to English that is misleading sometimes, because we can't find Lebensführung. It isn't translated, conduct of life, but the Lebensstil. So in terms of content, there is also a shifting of the focus from to an empirical measurable patterns of work, family, or leisure, or consumption. But the problem of being able to lead one's own life, the problem of freedom and the problem of sense have been removed, and as well as the dimension of conflicts of lifestyles has quite disappeared. Where the concept of conduct of life is actually used, well, the focus is on the daily management of life. The focus is on people's everyday coping strategies. So finally, my question is, what is the potential of using the Weberian concept of conduct of life within a research program on social constellation and social change in today's world of life, in the 21st century? So in which research domains it can be usefully employed and to achieve which research objectives? So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura Leonardi, and Mauro Magatti.
Well, thank you. I asked Professor Agodi to let me down since I have the word in the afternoon, but I thank for insisting, and I greet Hans-Peter. Nice to see you. And well, my question is very similar to the Professor Esther Leonardi just made it. It is, what is your personal, because you are a big, one of the best knower of Weber in Germany. So, what is your personal opinion? Because Shortino was provocative, saying that he read Weber since he's useless, and Fitzy replied that no, it's very useful. So I'm interested in your opinion. You said something at the end of your presentation, but I would like to push you to be more explicit on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mauro, and please, Professor Segre, Alessandro Segre, you have the floor, please. You have to start your microphone, please. Alessandro Segre, please, your microphone, you have to start
now
your
right?
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, all right. I have a few remarks concerning the paper by Professor Müller, and most of my little time will be devoted to those remarks. Then I will make a few points, hints at what Professor Shortino and Professor Leonardi said, but most of my time will be devoted to the paper by Müller. And I think that everyone in the audience has appreciated Professor Müller's learned essay on how Weber has achieved his current status of foremost sociological classic. I wouldn't object to the way the argumentation has been built by him. That is, from the story of the publication of his oeuvre, phase number 1, through the reconstruction of the distinctive steps that connoted, that marked the reception and discussion of Weber's intellectual legacy, and have been instrumental to make Weber a classic in today's sociological theory. Finally, raising the question of what can still be learned from Weber's work. These were the three issues that Professor Müller has raised. No objection. I have, however, a few points that his paper has elicited. Namely, number 1, is this line of argumentation following the 3 points by Müller, following a logical order, such as, for example, what we can learn from Weber is predicated on the reception of his legacy, which in turn depends on some degree or perhaps completely on the story of the publication of his oeuvre. In other words, how are these 3 points related to each other? If, on the other hand, to suppose there is no relationship, the 3 points are put forward per se as such, as worthy of discussion. If this is the case, then each of them is considered worth debating per se. Does any of them deserve greater attention than the other 2 according to some criteria? There are 3 points that Professor Müller has made. Is any of the 3 points more interesting, more relevant for sociological theory than the others, or they are all the same level from a theoretical point of view? It will be interesting to know. And if any criterion should be used to give importance, give relevance to any of these points, to all of them, whatever, what is the criteria? For example, the amount of discussion concerning Weber's intellectual legacy, or the trustworthiness, the reliability of those that participate in the discussion. There were some very important people, Parsons and others. Or rather, the variety of possible reasons why Weber is today a foremost classic author. That could be explained in many ways. Which way Professor Müller would prefer and why? Finally, it's not apparent, at least not apparent to me, whether and how Weber's paradigm for historical comparative research, I quote Müller at the end of his paper, may remain unscathed and intact in spite of radically different and conflicting interpretation of this paradigm, such as those put forward by very capable interpreters of Weber, Karlberg, Schluchter, also that Müller himself quotes at the very end of his presentation. Or now, Karlberg on the one hand and Schluchter on the other have presented a completely different interpretation of Weber and have laid stress on different paradigms that should be conducive to appropriate interpretation of Weber. They are conflicting paradigms. Is there any solution to resolve the conflict nowadays? These 3 points that I've made deserve, I think, further discussion, further interest on the part of Weber scholarship and the part of Professor Müller himself. This is what I want to say regarding Professor Müller. As for, I'll be very, very short regarding the intervention by the other two speakers, not because they're not interesting, but because my time is short. Anyway, Professor Shortin has raised the question, what is a classical author and why the author is classical? Weber is the classical author number one. Okay, why? And it's a question of sociological relevance today, and it seems to be, I may be mistaken, that Professor Shortin has chosen this criterion of relevance to decide whether an author such as Weber is classical. It's classical because he has raised more important questions today, or because he has raised more questions than others. And it would be very difficult. For example, Weber versus Durkheim. Durkheim has raised a very important question too. What is a criterion of selection that make it possible to decide what a classical is more important than other classical authors? And I promise to be short, and I'm going to keep my promise. So I'll be short myself regarding last paper by Professor Efficacy. Only a few words. I agree completely. Weber, there is no ontology in Weber, but Shortino made the same point. There are concepts and methods to analyze this society. And this point is being made by Müller, but also by Efficacy, and no objection at all. We can model is difficult life conduct, Lebensführung. Lebensführung, life conduct was raised as a central question by Hennes. And not everyone agreed at those times in the 80s, but the problem has remained. What a difficult task, life conduct. Now, in our age where neoliberalism seems to be important, and what would Weber think about neoliberalism? And Fitz has raised this question, and it's a quite difficult task. Now, I would ask Professor Fitz if there is any connection, and what would be the connection between this question, what Weber think on neoliberalism, and life conduct, which was a central issue for Weber. There is any connection between neoliberalism and life conduct, and what is this connection? This is all. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Sandro Seire. There is a last question by Paolo Volonté.
Hello, thank you, Maria Carmela. Can you hear me well enough? Yes. Okay, thank you, Hans-Peter Müller, for your speech. I would like just to raise a more circumscribed question regarding a specific issue, which is science. Now, I found intriguing that in your speech you mentioned the Wissenschaftslehre among the key contributions offered by Weber to the sociological thought as for the intuition of Marianne Weber. But you did not include science among the keywords of Weber's relevance to the 21st century sociology. Okay, now, at first sight, this is obvious, I think, since today's social studies of science and technology, or the science of science, to use Bourdieu's words, have developed based on a constructionist approach. They seem to have nothing to share with the universalistic view of Weber's Wissenschaftslehre, that is, with his idea that the scientific knowledge claims should not be just collective or shared common, but should be binding beyond every possible cultural distinction. Okay, claims that must be a knowledge that's correct even by Chinese. Okay, according to his words. Nevertheless, I feel that Weber would have a lot to contribute to today's science and technology studies. Consider, for instance, the fundamental idea developed by STS that the epistemic authority of a scientific field is normally constructed by participants to that field through a careful and meticulous work of setting up boundaries against what should stay outside. Okay. Epistemic authority is not directly granted by the scientific outcomes of the field itself, which have no agency. It is allocated by a community, which could be a scientific community, a political community, even a lay people community, according to the situation. Now, scholars that have investigated such boundary work aimed at constructing epistemic authority are not familiar with Weber's thought. But what they have envisioned is, I think, a form of legitimation of a social order. They have recognized that science is a matter of the legitimate power to define and explain bounded domains of reality. And I think that if we were able to consider thoroughly scientific disciplines as social orders, as legitime Ordnungen, okay, in the meaning of Wirtschaft und Gesellschaft, we could provide a much better explanation of their epistemic authority in terms of legitimate validity. Okay, this is not does not imply to embrace the constructionist approach, but it would help us understanding of a number of currently discussed issues in science studies. I want just to mention one case, but because it's very up to date, it could help framing the much discussed question of the crisis of expertise. That is the paradox of scientific authority in regulatory science. So the paradox of experts that are scientists when they work to produce reliable knowledge, but political subjects when they are called upon to help addressing societal issues, as the case of epidemiologists and virologists in the governance of the pandemics has made clear to everybody recently. Okay, so that's why I'd rather agree with Gregor Fizzi than with Giuseppe Shortino. Why should we keep on reading Weber? Because, I think, as all classics do, he enables us to look with more profound insight into current societal issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Paolo Volonté. And well, I'm really sympathetic with the question, the issue he has raised. We are actually working together within this kind of way of framing the issue of the crisis, so-called crisis of legitimacy of science. Well, and now the floor is again to Professor Müller for some, answer maybe feedbacks to what we have heard since now. Thank you very much again to you. Please.
Yeah, thank you, because to both Professor Giortino and to Gregor Fizzi, but also for those very intriguing questions. Yeah, maybe to cut a long story short, I mean, what are the classics good for? I think both commentators are right. I mean, I know Gianfranco for a long time. He's a good colleague and friend of mine. And actually, sometimes when he was at the European University Institute in Florence, I shared his seminars on the classics. There, I had not the impression that he thinks that classics are useless. Quite to the contrary, as his books showed, one can make the classics applicable to current problems of today. Of course, it is right. I mean, there's the what I tried to do in this kind of overview, if you like, was to reconstruct this, in my eyes, completely unlikely, improbable road to success and fame of Max Weber. It is so unlikely. He's not even a sociologist. I mean, he founded the German Sociological Association, and in my book, in the last chapter, because I'm now in the midst of this organization, I can share the frustration of Max Weber that he actually left the German Sociological Association again. And insofar, I agree with Giuseppe Sportino, he would do the same today. Because sociology today is not sociology, but empirical social research in search of money. If the results are relevant or not is absolutely unimportant. It's to get the next project going. Further research is always needed. And this is how sociology became empirical social research without being able, as Gregor said, to give orientation with respect to the frame of our society, to the overall picture, how those different orders, spheres of value, fields, systems, logics, as Gregor said, how they either collide or conflict or are indifferent, or, as he says, we observe colonization processes. Yeah. So this was my aim, to show this unbelievable story without, in that sense, I'm Weberian, without giving a value judgment that this is a good development. Actually, I'm for your idea of a pantheon. And maybe with respect to my own career, I could say I went to Heidelberg to pursue my doctoral dissertation. And of course, Wolfgang Schluchter thought that I would write on Max Weber, but I told him I will write on Emil Durkheim, because he is absolutely underestimated in German sociology because of this dominance of Marx and Weber. And you can imagine how frustrated Wolfgang Schluchter was. In a way, the one comment maybe to the classics. Yeah, there is this strange story. Edward Tiryakian followed up why Durkheim and Weber ignored each other. Well, it's not. I mean, it's clear why. You said it. I mean, if one knows that Max Weber took a whole summer to correct Marianne Weber's famous book on women, and then one reads achievement, because all the facts and figures are there, but there is no system, there is no systematic argument. I mean, this is a criticism which is absolutely worse for Weber, for Max Weber, not for Marianne, I mean, but for Max, because he had tried to bring into this work a red thread, a systematic. So they were inimical. And Durkheim was for Max Weber an empiricist and positivist. And this was the enemy, of course. Although they share this alliance to Kant in a very different Neukantianismus in Germany, but that's only to the side. Weber cites Durkheim in his sociology of religion with respect to the forme élémentaire de la vie religieuse. This is, but only as a he gives a literature review, and he's mentioned. He's mentioned at least that. So we know that they recognized each other and read each other's things. Now to the questions. Maybe I can ask Emanuele Madonia for giving me the 17th slide, because this is maybe an answer to Professor Laura Leonardi's very intriguing question on the conduct of life.
Yes, I'm going to show them to you.
Okay, perfect. 17th slide is on the conduct of life. And here you see that your criticism is quite right, that conduct of life is a compact term, which combines different concepts. On the one hand, life chances for the social structural domain, and on the other hand, lifestyles for the cultural domain. Life chances, if you like, give, here we are. Life chances on the left side, social structure, give the material ideal resources for leading one's life. So you see, conduct of life is in the center. And what we can measure, what we can see in terms of consumption, in terms of family life, etc., are lifestyles. But this is only one dimension, the horizontal dimension. The vertical dimension combines macro and micro aspects, because the macro level, Weber, as you know, has no concept of society, but talks about value spheres and life orders, like the economy, like science, like, and on the one hand, which have an impact on the personality, and it's the personality which needs to choose those values, those demons which lead then his or her life. So you see a direct confrontation with respect to Lebensführung is not, conduct of life is not that easy. One has to really work with this picture. And how one can do this shows slide 19. Emanuele, if you can show, one more. So you can even use this for what we've done. We have a book series which is called Economy, Society, and the Conduct of Life. And one book in this series is called Social Inequality and the Conduct of Life. And with this system, you can use it. And I've combined Adam Smith, Ralph Dahndorf, and Pierre Bourdieu in this model. And you see that with respect to the conduct, who is able to really lead one's life, who has the power and the sovereignty to lead one's life, the higher you get in the social hierarchy, the more independence you have and the more life is designed. So the upper class enjoys luxury, as Smith said, the high life in Dahndorf's terms, and a particular style of life, distinctive style of life, as Bourdieu showed. The middle classes strive for convenience. interestingly enough, it is here in the middle classes and in the middle sector of society, that values, norms, and moralities are handled. I mean, take a party like the Green Party in Germany, which wants to reign in the next elections. I mean, this is typical petit bourgeois forms of reconstructing, reforming, even maybe revolutionizing society. If you are belonging to the upper class, you are structurally conservative. You don't want to change anything because you have already the best form of life. But if you are in the middle, then you strive for something. Yeah, all the status work is done in this middle class, in this big middle class. Now the underclass has the lowest dependence. And for them, conduct of life is almost struggling for survival, subsistence in Smith's terms, survival in Dahndorf's terms, and a way of life, a collective way of life. For instance, the proletarian way of life. This is a collective way of life, not an individualistic one. And this is basically adaptation to the context, to the situation, to what is possible at all, with no stylization options and opportunities. So with such a model, you can because you asked me what to do with this, you can really try to analyze social inequality and the conduct of life, that is class and Lebensführung. Yeah. To Mauro's question, my personal opinion, yes, I do think that even Wolfgang Schluchter, whom I've interviewed for a special issue of the Berliner Journal für Soziologie, now talks about a philosophy of life, a hidden philosophy of life in Weber, almost, as I said, almost a mystical, metaphysical legacy. Max Weber said once to his wife, do you think that I'm a mystic? And she was absolutely puzzled because Max Weber is anything but a mystic. But he says, well, maybe at the end of the day, I am a mystic. And this mysticism in Weber, this hidden deeply embedded worldview is that he thinks that any society should, and that's a very liberal outlook, should give most of all the possible life chances to its people, that they can develop their life autonomously and sovereignly, and not, as I said, live or you are lived. And he is for, active. Etzioni called it once the active society. This is exactly Weber's approach. Okay, maybe that for the first questions. The third questions by Sandro. Thank you very much, Sandro. Yeah. Status, there is insofar a logical order that if Marianne Weber wouldn't have put out Weber's writings, we would have no basis for any discourse about Weber or working with Weber. And the reception, the waves of reception are very, very important to understand why Weber is still with us today and not completely forgotten. I mean, why does, for instance, the Frankfurt School, I mean, there's a letter Adorno wrote to Ernst Bloch saying, come to Heidelberg, we discuss Max Weber, this will be very, very important. And Ernst Bloch, I mean, had no interest whatsoever in Max Weber. You see, I mean, that a person like Adorno, who criticized Weber so hard, was, on the other hand, very highly influenced by Max Weber, and actually, which I want to show in a future project, by Georg Simmel. Frankfurt School, I mean, the critical theory always learned from their enemies a lot, yeah. But then they said, don't read them, yeah. Don't read Max Weber, he's a conservative. Don't read Simmel, I mean, he is for German culture, so he's almost a fascist, yeah. It was this kind of theory policy or theory politics that Frankfurt School always had, and made it to actually the #1 in Germany, in the Federal Republic of Germany. Habermas was the quintessential intellectual in the former Federal Republic of Germany. Okay, I hope to have answered your question. Yeah, Steve Carbeck and Schluchter both go for historical comparative research. Yes, but it may be that Steve, an old friend of mine, sees many parallels, actually, as I do, between Alexis de Tocqueville and Max Weber. Actually, Wilhelm Hennis wrote an article trying to show that Max Weber must have read Alexis de Tocqueville. It's not that sure, but he, as an American, frames Weber much into this American direction, American democracy, the comparative analysis of political orders, etc., whereas Schluchter really takes seriously Weber's approach of a cultural sociology. German sociology is a cultural science. I mean, it's very important to understand that. This is maybe the difference between French sociology and German sociology. Durkheim has a sociology of religion, yes, but he's very focused on social structure, division of labor, things like that. Whereas German sociology tries always to analyze the relationship between society and culture. That's very important. Culture is a very independent variable, as Laura said. So the conduct of life can also be influenced by the cultural values, norms, and the definitions of what is a good life. Okay. The last question, science. Yes, that's a good point in the Wissenschaftslehre. I would agree with you that Weber has a universalistic approach. Last week I gave a digital lecture in Wuhan, in China, and I can tell you the Chinese are absolutely wild about Max Weber. I mean, they love Max Weber, and it's difficult to understand because if you read the chapter on Confucianism, what does Weber say? I mean, they are very active. Yes, we are active. Yeah, but they lie and betray. They have no concept of human rights, no concept of truth, etc. Yes, this is the way we are, but we are very successful. Okay, yeah. So they love Max Weber, although Weber criticizes Confucian, this Confucian, very pragmatist outlook to social life. Very interesting. In a way, Weber could be interpreted as you did, that, and one can see this with respect to Pierre Bourdieu, who is a big Weberian. I mean, he is, as I wrote in an article, Max Weber Redivivus, and talks about fields. And fields is the, if you like, translation of Weber's value spheres and life orders into a modern language. So the construction of a scientific field, that would have been something Weber could really be in line with, and there would be a consensus, I'm sure. He was always, I mean, he was always looking for orders and life spheres which need to be pinpointed and should not be muddled with other life orders. That was something, so he was a genius of differentiation, if you like. Thank you very much for these really great questions and comments. It was a pleasure to be able to talk to you. And I hope I wrote to you. I'm a single educating father at the moment because my wife has a job in Bavaria and is not in Berlin. So I see how much I can follow this week of very interesting presentations and discussions. So please accept that I will not be always with you this week, but only from time to time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans-Peter Müller, and thank you for your lecture and for your feedbacks. I think this has been an opening session which makes our next days and our continuing day to day as a good continuation of a great debate where Max Weber is a classic, but is also here among us because all our debate, all our questions about sociological concepts, sociological methodological way of looking at contemporaries are, well, a way of being with Weber after 100 years after his death. Yes. So thank you very much. And well, I am happy to remind to all of us that today we will open our afternoon at 2:30 past meridian with a conversation with Alessandro Cavalli about Max Weber. And then we will continue with a dialogue between Carlo Trigili and Mauro Magatti. And I'm very happy to remind that from tomorrow morning in the next days, we will have morning sessions dedicated to our PhD students. And this is in line, I think, what all of you have said about the idea that reading Weber is a good idea also for our contemporary students and early career researchers in sociology. The first PhD student session will be guided and lectured by Hans-Peter Müller, and that's why I have to say to him another time, thank you. So thank you to all of you, and see all of you at 2:30. Thank you.
Thank you.